In this talk, I'm going to cover some aspects about prana that you might already know and some that you may not be very familiar with. And either way, this will be a very visual and fun way of looking at this very complex concept of prana. Let's start with this very fundamental question. What in the world is prana? What does it even mean? So fundamentally, let's start with the pronunciation. It is prana. So the na has a little dot underneath. So it is a hard na with the retroflex of the tongue a little bit. So prana, okay? So what is prana? So let's start at the very beginning. So how we conceptualize prana and understand it really depends on our worldview and the view or the darshana that we subscribe to. And that forms the fundamental basis of our understanding of ourselves, of the world, and of course, of spiritual practice. And mine happens to be established in non-dual tantra, Shakta and Shiva tantra. So my understanding of prana will be probably a little bit different than somebody else's understanding whose worldview and darshana may be a little bit different than this one. So starting at the very beginning of this view, this is a generalized map of what are known as the Tatwas. So a Tattva is a principle of reality, which is a sort of a subdivision of reality for us to understand how this world and this universe and how ourselves, our bodies and our minds are created. So in this view of non-dual Shiva and Shakta Tantra, so at the very beginning, we have the two fundamental realities or two aspects of the same reality. The first one of which is known as Shiva. And Shiva is static, timeless, the static and timeless potential of aspect of reality. So Shiva is completely devoid of attributes. So Shiva is primarily very difficult to conceptualize because anything we conceptualize is not it, is not Shiva. So whatever we conceptualize then is part of the other aspect, the second aspect of the same reality known as Shakti. So Shakti is the dynamic aspect of reality. And one way to think of this is that Shakti is Shiva's creative potential, or the creative energy, or the various powers that we ascribe to the one reality is Shakti. So even though we are differentiating Shiva and Shakti to be two different aspects, they are the one and the same. It's like saying there is water and wetness, or fire and heat, which you can't really separate, right? What is fire without heat? We can't even conceptualize that, right? So it's the same thing with Shiva and Shakti. So Shiva and Shakti have three modes of operation, which are the three powers of this combined aspect of reality of Shiva and Shakti together. And those are Ichcha, Jnana, and Kriya Shakti. So whenever we say Shakti, Shakti means power. So everything, whenever we add that word Shakti to something else, it means that power of whatever it is that we're trying to describe. So Ichcha in this, Ichcha Shakti in this sense is the divine will, the divine intention to create, because creation has to begin with will or intention. So that is Ichcha Shakti. To create anything, we have to have knowledge on how to go about doing that. So that is Gana Shakti. And then once we have the will and the knowledge, the third thing is to actually go ahead and do it. And that is the Kriya Shakti. So these are the three aspects of Shiva and Shakti, these three powers of Shiva and Shakti, the three primordial powers out of which arises this entire map of reality or the universe. Now, right here, we have Shiva and Shakti at the top, as you can see. But then we have another layer where it's as if Shiva and Shakti, this divine, would like to cover itself in a bunch of layers so that it can become the universe where everything appears different and new and separate. So if we are saying the whole universe arises from the same source, if that source is not understood to be different in every aspect and in every form, then what is the point of creation, right? If we come to see that everything is the same, everything is fundamentally one, although there are different forms and different aspects of reality, then that's a very different understanding rather than starting with that non-difference. So what I'm saying is, in order for that one reality to appear as many, as this diverse universe with countless forms, Shiva and Shakti have to take on some veils, some, masks, so to speak, so that they appear different to each other, to the different forms, which are all their own self, right? That veil of that Shiva and Shakti take on is known as Maya. Maya is the illusion of separateness. It's the illusion of the many, as in, we are not able to look at another person and see ourselves in them. And that is because of this Maya. When one form looks at another form, if I look at another person, I look at a table or a tree, I'm not able to see that what is in the table or in the tree or in the dog or in another person is essentially what is my own identity. So the one appearing as many is the fundamental veil of Maya. And so this veil of Maya has 5 different aspects to it. And those are known as kanchukas, which means they are the limitations. It's like putting on a very tight piece of clothing that restricts you, restricts your movement. And so there are 5 such coverings. And these are the limitations that take this unlimited reality, the limitless reality, and limits it into time and space. So the limitations are in time, the limitations are in space, in desire. So there is this Ichcha Shakti, or the intention or the divine will. When that becomes limited, it becomes individual or limited desire. And when Gana Shakti becomes limited, it becomes limited knowledge. And when Kriya Shakti becomes limited, that becomes limited action. So these are the 5 limitations, so to speak, of the divine. So the divine unlimited reality takes on these 5 different types of limitations in order to become the world, in order to become you and me and everything else that exists. So once we have this layer of Maya, then we have another level of differentiation. So even within that grander scheme of the limitation, there are 2 aspects. So there is this Purusha, which is really Shiva, as in the attributeless fundamental self. Okay, in other words, who you are, who I am, what anything is this reality known as Shiva. This attributelessness that is known as Shiva. And when it becomes limited through the Kanchukas, in this tradition, in this darshana, it is known as Purusha. It is this individual awareness that is without attributes. And the Purusha is that aspect that remains static. And then the dynamic aspect, which is the one aspect of Shakti, the Mahashakti, is Prakriti. Prakriti means nature or materiality. So Prakriti is the potential of materiality that is all attributes. So Purusha is no attributes, Prakriti is all attributes. They are as if separate. Okay? When they come together, the Purusha and the Prakriti, so the Prakriti becomes activated. So Prakriti by itself has all of these attributes in the form of 3 gunas. And those are sattva, rajas, and tamas. We'll talk a little bit about this later. But these are the 3 fundamental qualities of nature. And they are all in perfect balance in Prakriti. So nothing is moving. But as soon as Purusha and Prakriti come together, there's an imbalance in this model. And it results in this explosion of the material world, beginning with what is known as Mahat at the cosmic level, and Buddhi, or this very, very rarefied intellect level at the individual level. And when this Mahat or this Buddhi at the cosmic level has to take on an individual I-ness. So every form, all of the countless forms have an individuality in them. And that is that Ahankara, which is the I maker in the individual. But on the cosmic level, it is that specific I-ness that makes that form it. That every form, this table is a table because of its I-ness. The dog is the dog because of its I-ness. The lion is the lion because of its I-ness. So that differentiation of individuation is known as Ahankara. But in the individual level, at the individual level, this Ahankara is known as the I maker. As in, we take on all kinds of conditioning from our upbringing, from our peers and from our caregivers and from our life experiences. We take on all of this and we say, I am this because of that. I am female, I am Indian, I am, whatever it is, whatever attribute we want to give to ourselves, that is part of the Ahankara. And then we have the Manus, or the mind. And at the individual level, the Manus is this mind. The mind where the outside world is taken in, and then we process it through various through our sensory perceptions and so on, and then we act. So the taking in of the world and then acting out in the world, it is all processed in the Manus, or the mind. And this is also the field of the thought and of emotion and so on. So the Buddhi, Ahankara, and Manus together is this greater field of the mind known as Chitta. Chitta, okay? Now in this model, coming down from the Tattva, which is Manus, is the Buddhi, Ahankara, and Manus are all different combinations of the same 3 gunas. And then the gunas act in specific ways, they combine in specific ways to create these 4 sets of 5. So there are the organs of perception, which are the sense organs, the 5 sense organs, the 5 organs of action, which are the hands that work, the feet that walk, the lower extremities that walk, the organ of speech, which is, the whole speech apparatus, and then the excretion, the organs of excretion, as well as the organs of reproduction. So the organs of action, and then you have the faculty of perception. So we can have, for instance, ears, but if we don't have the faculty of hearing, then the sense organ isn't really functional. We also have to have the faculty of hearing. right? So similarly, we need to have the faculty of sight and touch and so on. So those 5 faculties of perception, which connect the sense organs to the external world, are also part of this, the whole, you know, the creative, the creative outflow of the 3 gunas. And then we have the 5 great elements. So these are, you know, space and air and fire and water and earth. So we have they are known as the Pancha Mahabhutas, so the 5 great elements. So these sets of 5, these 4 sets of 5 are produced or are the product of the 3 gunas acting in specific ways together and filtered through the buddhi, ahankara, and manas. Okay, and then we have, from the level of the Pancha Mahabhutas, from the level of the 5 great elements, we have the 3 fundamental principles, again, doshas, which I'll talk about in just a little bit. So this is the map, right? So we have at the beginning, we have these 2 fundamental principles, Shiva and Shakti, and then there is this, so unmanifest Shiva and Shaktis becoming the world, becoming the universe. But what we really need to understand is all of this is happening within the greater field of Shiva and Shakti in perfect equilibrium, as in they are never actually separate. It always appears that way because of this tattva map, but the unnumbered tattva, so we start with Shiva as 1 and Shakti as 2 and so on, and then we get to Earth, the last of the tattvas, and we have 36 tattvas. But what we really need to understand is that there is a tattva number 0, and that is Shiva Shakti in perfect equilibrium. So in every moment, in every experience, the Shiva and Shakti in equilibrium and as manifestation is happening simultaneously. Okay, and what we need to understand about prana is that it is pervasive throughout this process. So prana is the pervasive creative energy that begins at that very top and then pervades all the other tattvas. Okay, so in other words, the answer to that question, what is prana? Prana is the energy of consciousness. So we can have the static consciousness, which is Shiva or Purusha, but what gives it dynamism and gives it the dynamic aspect is the energy of consciousness, and that is prana. So Shiva, as we saw, is static awareness. Shiva is unchanging and timeless, and Shakti is dynamic, creating change through space and time. Right? It's another way of saying this is that Shiva and Shakti take on these limitations of time and space to become the universe. Now, Purusha is static. After the level of Maya, Purusha is static and Prakriti is materiality. And with their union, there is the creation of the material world with physical laws and the movement of prana. So when we say physical laws, you know, whatever you might consider to be a physical law, gravity or the electromagnetic forces or the forces within an atom that cause the electron to move, for instance, any of that is driven by prana. So it's a fundamental force of creation. So one thing that's very important to understand is prana is singular. There is only one, okay? But as we are going to see, prana is understood in many different forms, but actually it's just one. There is only one, okay? So in other words, prana shakti is a tiny fraction of mahashakti. Mahashakti is that shakti, you know, with Shiva as the first tattva, Shakti as the second tattva. that entire unfathomable power of Shiva is Mahashakti, and she is the primordial creator. And Prana Shakti is a tiny fraction of that, because remember, there is still Shiva and Shakti in perfect equilibrium at all times. And so only a part of that becomes all of creation. Now, prana is life, right? And not just organic life, right? Life in general, okay? Prana is the animator of everything. So living beings are actually called prani. You know, in the Indian languages, the living beings are called prani because prana is what determines whether there is life or not. No prana means there's no life. No prana means there's no intellect, ahankara or manus, which is that chitta. No prana means there's no thought, there's no perception, there's no feeling, there's no breath. No prana means there is no universe. This is very important to understand. No prana means no universe. So prana is in and through everything, okay? So it sounds like one of the Star Wars movies, but it's true. Prana is in and through everything. So anything that we can't account for as belonging to the material world and creating the material world and driving evolution and all the changes and so on is prana. It is the primordial force. So a few misconceptions that I'd like to clarify. Prana is not the breath. Okay, very important to understand. There are many times that you'll find that you can stop breathing, right? You can hold your breath. And some people can hold their breaths for a very long time. And yet there is prana because they're still alive, right? There are many times in deep meditation when the breath kind of stops for long periods. And yet there is the life force. So breath is merely the sign of being animated by what? By prana. So prana is the animator of the breath. So prana is not the breath, okay? Prana is not oxygen either. Very important to understand this. The principle that creates oxygen is prana. So if we say prana is oxygen, then we're saying, well, how do the plants and the trees live then? Right? Because they take in carbon dioxide and create oxygen. So if prana is oxygen, how are the plants and trees being animated to do that? To, you know, photosynthesize and to take in the carbon dioxide and give out the oxygen. That is the function of prana. Prana is what is driving that particular process. So prana is not oxygen. Very, very important to understand. It's not, okay? So prana, let's go back to that issue of the gunas. So Prakriti, as I was saying earlier, is inherently in equilibrium with the three inherent gunas. So yeah, it's inherently in equilibrium because it is inherently saturated with the three gunas, which are tamas, rajas, and sattva. Okay, so rajas is the principle of dynamism, and tamas and sattva are static. So for anything to move anywhere in the universe, it is the action of rajas, because that is the principle of movement, okay? The action of rajas on tamas and sattva in different ways is what creates the organs of sensing, or the sense organs, the organs of action, the faculties of perception, which are also known as tanmatras, as well as the great elements. So rajas acts on sattva, creates one set of things. It acts on tamas and creates another set of things, okay? So rajas acting on sattva and tamas is really the driving force for creation. So Prakriti is in equilibrium. As soon as Purusha and Prakriti come together, there is an imbalance, and boom, there is creation with this rajas taking over, acting on sattva and tamas, and creating all these objects of the material world. And along those lines, when those great elements are created, those great elements combine in different ways to give rise to 3 doshas. Now, dosha means fault, right? So it's the same thing as with the gunas. So they were in perfect equilibrium, and then they're disturbed, and it's that disturbance that causes creation. It's the same thing with the dosha. A dosha means it's actually a flaw as in it's out of equilibrium. And so it is always trying to get back to wholeness. And that's why it's called a dosha. Okay, so there are 3 doshas, vata, pitta, and kapha. And if you are familiar with Ayurveda, you already know this. And what we need to understand is vata is that principle of movement. So vata is inherently then rajasic, right? Vata is that, now we say rajas is that fundamental principle of movement, but how rajas acts is through vata. So vata is that principle of movement across the universe. So it is that movement of the galaxies. It is the movement of, air. It is the movement of change. It is the movement of one thing to another. So it is the movement of evolution. It's the movement of time from one moment to another, of the seasons from one season to another, of us aging, right? From one year to another, from one day to another. So that sequentiality or movement is provided by vata, which is a combination of 2 great elements, which is space and air. Pitta is the element or the principle of transformation. So you can have movement, but if one thing doesn't change into another thing, then you don't know that you don't know the difference between one thing and another. So if you have spring turning into summer, something has got to change other than just moving in time, right? The quality of the spring needs to change into the quality of the summer. That principle of transformation is pitta. So it is that principle of transformation in the body as well. We take in the food, and that food is transformed by the action of this pitta into eventually our cells and our organs, right? So that pitta is that principle of transformation. And then we have kapha, which is the principle of structure. See, everything has to have a location and everything has to have a structure, and that structure is given by kapha. So you can see how everything in creation, anything you can think of, living, non-living, animate, inanimate objects, it doesn't matter what you can think of, you can see that they are governed by these 3 doshas, which come from the 5 great elements. So vata is a combination of space and air, and pitta is a combination of water and fire, and kapha is the combination of water and earth, right? So everything then in manifestation is made up of the 5 elements, and those 5 elements working as doshas creates the limitation or the understanding or the perception of time and space and change, okay? And that is true on the cosmic level as well as within the individual level. And so what is driving all of this? Prana, of course, right? Prana is that fundamental principle that is more upstream and more fundamental or basic than the gunas and more at the level of Prakriti. Okay, so that prana, and then even further as Mahashakti. So this prana Shakti comes all the way down from the highest. Okay.